Did you know that starting May 7th, 2025, the enforcement of the REAL ID will take effect if you intend to fly domestically or visit certain federal facilities? The REAL ID Act, which was passed by Congress in 2005, enacted the 9/11 Commission's recommendation that the federal government set standards for the insurance of sources of ID, such as driver's licenses and ID cards. This act will be strictly enforced by the DHS and TSA, again, starting May 7, 2025. The official purposes that are covered by the REAL ID Act and regulations are accessing certain federal facilities, boarding federally regulated commercial aircraft, and entering nuclear power plants. The REAL ID Act's prohibitions do not affect other uses of driver's licenses or ID cards unrelated to official purposes as it is defined in the Act. This Act does affect all U.S. states, the District of Columbia, and the 5 territories. So how do I get a REAL ID? You must visit your state's driving licensing agency website to find out exactly what documentation is required to obtain a REAL ID. At the most, you will need to have documentation showing your full legal name, date of birth, social security number, 2 proofs of address of principal residence, and a valid, unexpired passport. Depending on the state, they may impose additional requirements, so be sure to check your state's driving licensing agency's website before visiting in person. What are some of the rules? You cannot use your REAL ID card for crossing the borders into Canada, Mexico, or other international travel. You cannot use your REAL ID card for international cruise travel. TSA does not require children under 18 to provide ID when traveling with a companion with the United States. However, the adult companion will need acceptable ID. Travelers that do not present a REAL ID compliant license or acceptable alternative beginning May 7, 2025 will not be permitted through the security checkpoint. How will the REAL card look? The REAL ID compliant card will look similar to your regular state-issued driver's license. However, it will have a white star marking with a different color in the background in the upper right-hand corner. For some states, may add other security features such as a unique design or a hologram overlay. But wait, hold up. I have to throw out the red flag here because we need to consider the risk involved in implementing this statewide national endeavor. Is the REAL ID a threat to our privacy? Consider this. The REAL ID will create a network of databases that contains Americans' personal information, which includes our social security numbers, photos, and copies of our birth certificates. This information will be accessible to federal and state employees. The REAL ID will require driver's licenses to meet certain standards to be accepted for federal purposes, such as boarding a plane, entering federal buildings, and accessing national parks. This will turn all driver's licenses into a national ID. The REAL ID will add machine-readable zones. That means it will require all driver's licenses and ID cards to have an unencrypted machine-readable zone that contains personal information. Anyone with a barcode reader, even if they're in a remote location, can obtain this information. For instance, third-party entities that target databases for marketing purposes. Such a unique identifier is an integral part of direct marketing because it allows an entity to authenticate the identity of potential consumers and to detect between consumers with similar identifying information. How easily has our personal information been bought and sold on the dark web? How often have you just even thought about, speak about, or even looked up information on the internet, and then all of a sudden you're bombarded with advertisement for that same product? The likelihood of a third-party marketing organization to use this new national identifier is magnified because of the information available on the REAL ID barcode. Privacy advocates and civil rights organizations have opposed the REAL ID Act. They argue that it would facilitate tracking of individuals, bring government into the center of every citizen's life, impose massive financial burdens, and get this one, not improve our national security. During my research on the implementation of the Act, I encountered significant concerns regarding privacy risks that warrant serious consideration. It is alarming how frequently Americans are alerted to data breaches and the exposure of our personal information, mainly including our Social Security numbers. As technology advances, our vulnerability increases. It is crucial to examine the protocols established to safeguard our data. Furthermore, we must explore how technology can be leveraged to stay ahead of the attackers who continuously seek to circumvent firewalls, encryption, and passwords that are designed to protect our sensitive information. So what's the alternative? For one, a U.S. passport book or passport card or an enhanced driver's license can be used in place of a REAL ID to board domestic flights and enter federal facilities. On the Transportation Security Administration's website, you can see a list of acceptable ID at the TSA checkpoint. You will also find additional information, including if you don't have your acceptable ID. The TSA officer may ask you to complete an identifying verification process to confirm your name and current address. If your ID is confirmed, you will be allowed to carry on to the screening checkpoint, where you may be subject to additional screening. If you decline to cooperate with the verification process, then you will not be allowed to board your flight. In order to prevent a breach of the REAL ID database system, it should be isolated from the internet and only use secure encryption methods. Now, we do understand that there is no network or encryption method that is completely invulnerable to attack. However, the government really needs to update the system as technology increases. This could limit attacks from hackers' ability to penetrate the database. For an unencrypted barcode, the government should create a 2D barcode specifically for REAL IDs. Using uniquely designed barcode and scanning and decoding technology would reduce unauthorized users from accessing barcode data. Also, strict liability standards for database breaches and negligence, meaning everyone should be held accountable, and that also includes the government. Liability will come into play when harm results from someone hacking into the database, faulty database software, or personal information leak due to bribery or unintentional disassimilation. It only takes one hacking attempt to result in the theft of millions of citizens' personal information. Using a strict liability standard would compel the government to use the most secure technology available or face tens of millions of dollars in damages for each database breach. If you go to the Department of Homeland Security's website, you will see the countdown clock along with an interactive tool to find out if you are Real ID ready. You can also review the website for detailed information about the Real ID and FAQs to help answer your questions. So in closing, if you are planning to travel throughout the U.S. starting May 7th, 2025, make sure you are compliant with a Real ID card and or alternative documentation to ensure you won't have any delays for your flight. You will find the link to the TSA Real ID website in the description below. Thank you for watching, and until next time, peace, love, and keep traveling.